The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. Fast food restaurants are known for, generally speaking, being opposed to increases to the minimum wage. High percentage of fast food employees earn the minimum wage in many states, and as a result are sort of more impacted on a percentage basis by increases to the minimum wage than businesses in which nobody is earning the minimum wage, for example. And notably, McDonald's has told the National Restaurant Association that they are no longer going to participate in lobbying at the local, state, and federal level against increases to the minimum wage. Jenna Gent, who's the vice president of government relations, said that the company believes wage increases should be phased in and that all increases should be treated the same way. This is something that could potentially open the door to more easygoing increases to the minimum wage that Democrats in the House, mostly in the House, but also some in the Senate, have been talking about. And, it's important not to concede more power than is real to a company like McDonald's, but I think it's just as important to recognize the importance of a giant like McDonald's saying that they are no longer going to participate in these lobbying efforts. Now, there's two ways to understand this, Pat. The first one is McDonald's has calculated that the negative PR around lobbying against minimum wage increases may cost them more than the minimum wage increases themselves, so that it's sort of like a business decision, and they're going to say, we're just going to let it go. We think the net effect will be relatively small. The other possibility is that they're going to continue using their dollars to indirectly lobby against minimum wage increases, but in other ways, not directly, not vocally, maybe not through the National Restaurant Association, but there are still other ways in which McDonald's can work to limit the extent to which the minimum wage is increased. Maybe that's just the kind of cynical me reacting to the statement from McDonald's.
My instinct is that this is a PR calculation. I think McDonald's recognizes that there has been a tipping point when it comes to the minimum wage. Vast majority of Americans are in support of raising the minimum wage. And I think if they don't do it, then they stand to be shamed into it. Maybe Bernie Sanders, Ro Khanna, other progressives in the Congress will do something similar to what they did with the Stop Bezos Act, which shamed Amazon into raising the minimum wage at that company to $15. I just don't think McDonald's wants that to happen to them, too.
There's another approach to this, which is that the federal minimum wage right now is $7.25 an hour. The goal of Democrats in the House is to raise it to $15 an hour by 2024. That's 4.5 years from now. There are many economic analysts who believe it is extraordinarily unlikely that in the next 4.5 years, the minimum wage is going to more than double. And that would be an approach for McDonald's saying, this isn't going to happen either way. There's so much other opposition to increases to the minimum wage that we should just get out of this for whatever negative impact it could have. And we can have our cake and eat it too, and that we can stop getting the negative attention for opposition to increases to the minimum wage. And it's not going to happen anyway. And that may be actually the most sort of realpolitik interpretation, which is it's not going to happen with or without McDonald's opposition.
Yeah, that's probably true. But maybe a slight increase, like the fact that the federal minimum wage is $7.25 right now is totally embarrassing. It should at least go up to $10. I think that's perhaps reasonable, even in this day and age with a Republican-controlled Senate.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I am increasingly, I don't know how many times a year, $7.25 is such a low minimum wage that something is happening in my brain where like I can't keep it in there. And I regularly forget that the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour federally. Here in Massachusetts, it's already $12 an hour. And when you consider that, going to 15 is significantly less drastic than at the federal level, going from $7.25 to 15. But I very often forget that the federal minimum wage is only $7.25 an hour. And I get that if you compare $12 an hour in New York City versus $7.25 an hour in, the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, the $7.25 in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota probably buys you a better standard of living than $12 an hour in New York. Although now I'm remembering, what is the New York City minimum wage? Let me look that up. It's $11.50. It's even lower. Yeah. So there's no question that in some places, $7.25 gets you a better standard of living than a higher minimum wage, maybe in Massachusetts or wherever. But there's almost like reverse sticker shock for me, Pat, where I see that 725 and I'm like, something just looks very wrong about that number.
It certainly does. And I think regardless of where you live in the United States, 725 is too low. Like, I can understand, yeah, maybe if you live in Kentucky, $12 an hour as the minimum wage could be acceptable, whereas New York City, you probably have to do $15 to $18. But yeah, imagine like working a full day, let's say 12 hours, and then you don't even make $100 for the day before taxes. Like, that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, and I would even say in places like New York City, I don't even know that 15 to 18 is a living wage. I think the minimum wage question is a different one, but it's certainly not a living wage if that's our expectation. So anyway, McDonald's will at least not openly be an impediment to increases to the minimum wage going forward. And we'll see what, if anything, that means for the actual increase to the federal minimum wage. The European Parliament has voted to stop moving clocks forward an hour in the spring and back an hour in the fall. This passed by a vote of 410 to 192. These time changes were introduced during World War I in Europe to save energy, and they are ending them in 2021. The final law hasn't been produced yet, but they are going to have a conversation with member nations. And the UK has indicated it will stick to the current system after Brexit. I don't even want to. We talked about Brexit on the regular show already. I don't want to open up the Brexit can of worms again. What I do want to bring up, I think, by the way, first of all, I'm for this. I would like the United States also to stop shifting time zones. I don't know. Are you on the same page as that, Pat?
Yes, permanent daylight savings time. That's what I want.
Yeah. And I always get confused. Is it permanent daylight savings time or permanent standard time? I don't know.
We want permanent daylight savings time.
I want a later sunset in the winter. That's all I
exactly
want.
Right.
Okay, that's my concern. There's some really interesting things about time zones in Europe. And so my stepmom is from northwestern Spain. It's a part of Spain that's directly above Portugal. Now, Portugal and Spain are on different time zones. Spain is in the same time zone as Italy and points significantly east of Spain, whereas Portugal is on the same time zone as the United Kingdom. I think I have that correct. And it really doesn't make too much sense that if you leave from northwestern Spain and drive south, you're not moving east-west at all, but you go into Portugal and it's an hour earlier. And it has a political history, which is, again, I'm going from memory here. Spain wanted to be, under the times of Franco, I believe, wanted to be for business purposes in the same time zone as Italy. And as a result, Spain chose to be part of that primary sort of Central Europe time zone rather than the same time zone as the UK and Ireland and Portugal. And it leads to this very weird thing where in northwestern Spain in the summer, the sun often is not even totally set by 10 p.m. Now, that's totally normal if you are very far north, like, in Norway or whatever, where they are used to. As you get closer to the Arctic Circle, you get those very, very late sunsets or no sunsets at all during the summer. But Spain is not so far north that should be going on, but it is because of this political time zone thing. And I always found that sort of interesting, a very political time zone thing, which really shouldn't be. I don't know if you feel strongly about it, Pat, but I am very, very strongly in favor of Spain getting on the same time zone as Portugal and the UK.
Yeah, that definitely would make sense. I think there are 3 states that don't move the clocks, and those are, if my memory serves me correctly, Hawaii, Indiana, and Arizona. Now, of course, Hawaii is out in the middle of nowhere, so it doesn't matter, like, if you're traveling from another state to Hawaii that you have to change the clocks, because you kind of expect that. But, like, if you're going from New Mexico to Arizona, you wouldn't think that you'd have to change the clocks. If you're going from Illinois to Indiana, you wouldn't think that you'd have to change the clocks. But, of course, in both circumstances, you do. And that's kind of like the same thing that they have going on Spain and Portugal. I will say about this, though, how awesome is it that the European Parliament looks like they're well on their way to passing it? Here in the United States, we're going to have a conversation about it for years to even make it a possibility. It doesn't seem like it's a possibility right now. It's not a voting issue. It's not like it's incredibly important to most people. Last month, Marco Rubio put out a bill that I think is called the Sunlight Protection Act, and that would make daylight savings time permanent. It's still just in the introductory phases. I don't think anything will come of it. There's a predictor site I looked at that said that it has only a 7% chance of actually passing. So yeah, dismal chances. That's what we get here in the United States.
I saw an interesting proposal which would it would eliminate the time change and it would reduce the US to 2 time zones. So you would basically have like East and West. You would combine Eastern and Central time zone, and then you would combine Mountain and Pacific time zone. And there are some wacky repercussions in terms of what would be happening on the furthest west and eastern borders of those larger time zones. But it actually wouldn't be, there would be complexities, some complexities with it, but it would really simplify a lot of things. And they might not be separated by, so there's 2 ideas. One is that they are separated by 1 hour. So when in the East, it's 1 p.m., in the West, it's 12 p.m. But there's a different proposal I saw, which would simplify to 2 main U.S. time zones, but they would be separated by 2 hours, which would be kind of weird because you could cross a state border from one to the next, and it's not 1 hour earlier, but 2 hours earlier, which I guess could have its own kind of idiosyncrasies. But honestly, I'm open to any of these proposals if someone can make a good case for it being a change in the positive direction.
Yeah, and you would be able to time travel. Like if you did something in the past hour or two that you regretted, you could just change time zones, and then you'd have the opportunity to undo it.
Yeah, well, to the extent that you can do that already. It just only by 1 hour rather than 2. I guess it can't take more than an hour if you want to do it, but not where my mind goes, I have to say, when I think about time zones. A Florida man died this weekend while reportedly trying to remove one of his pet pigeons from a power line using a 20-foot aluminum pool pole, which, of course, is made out of metal, and it's a really bad idea. The 36-year-old Elian Garcia Rivera was electrocuted in West Palm Beach and found unresponsive near his pigeon coop on his property. There apparently was a pigeon that was just hanging out on this power line, and he tried to grab it with this long 20-foot pole and was tragically electrocuted when the pole touched the power line. He was taken to a local hospital and pronounced dead. Of course, this is a bad idea. You never want to do anything like this with power lines. You never know what's live. You particularly don't want to use metal. But I don't know how much we have to add about the electrocution pad. I want to talk about the pigeon coop thing. I've always been fascinated by people who are interested in keeping pigeons as a hobby. I know Mike Tyson did it. There are stories in the book Donnie Brasco about undercover FBI agent Joe Pistone, who went undercover with the New York mafia families, crime families, as Donnie Brasco, about some of the big or mid-level mobsters having pigeon coops on the terraces of their buildings in Brooklyn. It's just always struck me as an unusual and fascinating hobby.
Yeah, Nikola Tesla, too. He was, of course, famous inventor, scientist, and at the end of his life, I think he was maybe suffering from some sort of dementia or some sort of cognitive decline. He started keeping pigeons, and there was one pigeon that he liked in particular. He said that he loved that pigeon like one would love a woman, and that's a little bit concerning. That may be going a little bit too far, I think.
That might be just a step too far in the pigeon pigeon husbandry, or I guess it's not really husbandry. You're not really mating the pigeons, but maybe they mate on their own. I don't really know that much about pigeons, but in any case, their ability to return to particular locations and find their way is pretty interesting. And anything Mike Tyson was into has to be interesting or wacky in some way, shape, or form. But once again, I don't think I have to tell most of our audience, assume every power line is live, never go near them with metal, and I don't know what other advice we can glean from this story.
Yeah, and to be fair, this man probably didn't have a 20-foot wooden pole. So in that sense, it's sort of excusable. Also, side note here, I didn't learn until a few years ago that doves and pigeons are essentially the same thing. Like, I think they're the same species of bird, except doves are white. That blew my mind when I found that out, because doves are thought of as so beautiful and peaceful and innocent, and pigeons are those annoying city creatures that you just want to shoo away.
So what I'm seeing is that both doves and pigeons are part of the same. Wait a second. Both dove and pigeon refer to the 308 species of birds from the Columbidae family. There's no difference between a pigeon and a dove in scientific nomenclature, but colloquially, English tends to categorize them by size. Doves tend to be smaller than what we call pigeons, although this is not always the case. I guess there's no difference between a dove and a pigeon, and they don't even mention the color. I mean, maybe that's a sort of colloquial understanding. If you see a white one, you call it a dove. But it appears that they're the same thing. It never would have occurred to me.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're breaking news to a lot of people here. I thought that, because I just found this out a few years ago, maybe other people didn't know as well. But that's often not the case for other things. Usually it's just me who's left in the dark.
Yeah, this is like when Trump says, a lot of people don't know X. And it's like, no, most people do know that. It's just you learned it 5 minutes ago before you got in front of a microphone. We have to be, got to be careful about using that Trumpism. That does it for today. New show, new bonus show tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.